Accelerating Synthetic Reality. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is Peter Rojas, partner at Betaworks Ventures. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, thanks for having me back on.
Absolutely. So for those people who may not have seen you on here before, or maybe they're not familiar with your work, what does Betaworks do?
Betaworks Ventures, we are a seed stage fund. We make investments often first check or very, very early in startups that are building in what we call emerging consumer behaviors. So we're looking for sort of frontier technology startups that are figuring out new ways that we connect or communicate or create in sort of new categories or emerging categories. And some of those right now that we're looking at are voice interfaces and spatial computing stuff like augmented reality, looking at esports and game streaming, and a new category which we call synthetic reality, which we've been very active in lately.
I want to get into that. In fact, as you mentioned, for the past few years, you've been doing these Betaworks camps and a program. It's essentially for startups, right? In the emerging technologies, some of the ones that you've mentioned so far. The current camp is synthetic reality. Let's drill down on what that means. You're taking.
Yeah, so
You said you're taking a slightly different approach. I want to find out why it's so different.
So with synthetic reality, it's essentially a new category or new term, and when the way that we think about it is that there are new AI and machine learning based techniques which are enabling the creation of new kinds of content, media, experiences, which we see blurring the boundaries between what we would say is the real and the artificial or the synthetic. And so examples of those are tools which you can use now to create hyper realistic CGI on your computer or on your home computer or on your phone, sort of democratizing CGI in a way that would cost millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars to create 20 years ago at sort of the studio level like Pixar, is now stuff that kids can do at home just by pulling the phone out of their pocket. We think a lot about sort of virtual characters. There's these new wave of influencers like Lil Miquela on Instagram, and these are synthetically generated characters which take advantage of, again, these sort of tools and techniques for creating and capturing, basically 3D characters. We're looking at stuff like synthetic voice. So, we could do something where what's called style transfer, where you could take a recording of my voice and actually apply your voice to it and capture all the inflection, intonation, basically the same, capturing all the same sort of dynamism of the original recording. Looking at things like deep fakes, which are being used sort of maliciously for putting people's faces into videos where originally was not intended. But we see that there are new kinds of animation and creation techniques are making it possible to put yourself or your friends into videos that you couldn't do. And we're an investor in a company called Morphin, which has a pretty cool app which you can now take popular GIFs and put yourself into the GIF. And so when the last Avengers movie came out a few weeks ago, they had basically a website where you could upload a picture of yourself, and you would be in all these Avengers GIFs. It's like kind of cool, fun stuff that we think are enabling a new wave of how people create.
Talk about, you mentioned certainly one example, but just talk about in general algorithmically generated creative content.
Yeah, so a few years ago, there was a new technique called generative adversarial networks, which is a little bit of a mouthful. Basically takes two neural nets and kind of pits them against each other. And this is really oversimplifying, and there's probably like a machine learning expert who's cringing right now. But essentially is able to kind of synthesize the data in a way to create new kinds of to basically take images and text and audio and things like that and kind of reform it in ways that would be extremely labor intensive if you were having humans do it. So, an example that comes to mind is you may have seen this sort of "this person does not exist" meme that was going around a few weeks ago, where there were these sort of virtual pictures of people that had never existed but were generated by an algorithm. So those were GAN based, and so you'll see things where it is you're able to take a photo and then apply the visual style of a certain kind of painter, like a Picasso or something like that. Those are GAN-based techniques, which are able to synthesize and extract sort of the key elements or qualities of something, and then put it into something else. And you see this, across the board, and being used in lots of different, really interesting ways. I mean, one of the things that is really fascinating is the ability to, take like a description of something and then generate a photo based on just the words that are being described, the words that are being put into the description. And so we have an investment in a company that's trying to do stock photos that way, where you can basically say, I need a dog, with 3 footballs, and it'll generate a photorealistic image based on the library of information of images that it has, and using a GAN-based machine learning engine.
Are there any sort of ethical or bias implications that could be folded into this kind of technology that you guys are considering as you potentially look at this as a camp and as training?
Yeah, so there are tons of ethical implications, for better or for worse. And I think, as a caveat, or for context, that there are lots of different ethical implications come up from lots of different technologies. And that certainly, if you want to hoax somebody or trick people, you can do that with text right now on the internet, right? It's not something that is unique to AI generated content or video. It's something like, a couple of humans and a Facebook account can wield a lot of, do a lot of damage, right? So just to set the context there. And then and there's certainly a lot of anxiety when Photoshop was introduced, and the ability to manipulate photos was something that became much easier to do, right? And something that, today we sort of bake into our assumptions when we look at a photo is we look for signs of it being photoshopped, and we also come to expect that some level of manipulation in photography. Certainly in commercial photography, we know that it's all manipulated and edited and changed around. So I think that that there are things that we have to be aware of and things we have to think about. We actually, with this camp, we are creating an ethics board or council, which will bring in people from industry, people from startups, and people from academia to help, frankly, the companies, but also I think the industry more generally navigate the ethical implications and where this stuff goes, and hopefully set out some best practices around what people should do and what people shouldn't do. And I think some of it is relatively straightforward. Like, if you are going to synthesize somebody's voice, you should have permission from the person whose voice you're using, and you should make sure that you're clearly, delineating what's going to be done or how it's going to be used. And the company that we have an investment in a company called Resemble.ai, which is building in this category, and they are not building a tool that anybody can just upload any audio they want and get a voice back. They are building something where if you are a media company, for example, and you have, the full rights to, the voices that you're using, you can use this engine to create synthetic speech, or they might generate entirely like with those pictures of people that didn't exist before, voices that seem realistic and real, but don't actually belong to any, human who's ever existed. So I think that, the companies themselves have to start to, put some guardrails on. We have seen some legislation that was introduced in the Senate, I think last year or earlier this year, was to ban the deep fakes that are distributed or created into the commission of a fraud or a crime. So, I think it's hard to criminalize the act of creating a deep fake in the first place, because on some level you'd be criminalizing every Hollywood movie that ever gets made, because they all have some sort of special effects thing where they're manipulating people's faces and putting them into other people's bodies and things like that. I mean, we kind of take that for granted now that those sorts of effects are available. I think what's challenging is that those effects are becoming available to regular people, and that is really where we have to become better educated ourselves as consumers of media. And I think we also have to start to think about the provenance of things that we consume. So if you see a video that's just randomly floating around on Facebook or Twitter, and it has somebody famous saying something that seems a little suspect, maybe wait to see if it gets checked out and vetted by, a news organization that you trust before you share it or comment on it or react to it. Because I think partly what people want is they want sensationalistic things that create controversy, that people react to, that people share. And I think being a little less trigger happy on that stuff would be good, regardless of whether it's a deep fake or not. And not to keep promoting things that I've invested in, but we also invest in a company called Deep Trace, which sells tools for detecting these fakes. So helping media companies, social networks, frankly, law enforcement, better detect when somebody is using one of these GAN-based techniques to create something for a malicious purpose. So, if you need to know whether that video is of somebody actually saying what they're, saying, or doing what they're doing, or, robbing that bank or something like that, it's a tool that will let you, analyze it. And a lot of this stuff is not going to be immediately visually obvious to like the naked eye just watching it. You're not necessarily going to be able to pick this stuff out. There's going to be things that you have to pick out in the more subtle sort of digital signature of the video, and at a pixel or sub-pixel level, so to speak, that lets you figure this stuff out.
Not everyone. You've had some really interesting results from your camps, but you're very selective about who you're going to admit into them. What kind of characteristics do you look for a viable startup?
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, we invest, we do these camps, these investment programs. We invest also outside of the camps, and it's not the only way that we like to work with companies, but it's one way that we love to pick a category that we're really excited about. We pick a new theme once or twice a year that we want to go really deep on and really focus on and get to understand better. And so the thing that we look for is, one, is it a company building in the category that we're focusing on? And so past themes have been things like computer vision or voice computing. And then beyond that, is it something where we see a viable path for the company to build something that grows and becomes successful? And so part of that is, especially this early stages, part of it's the team and the founders. We don't really admit anything that isn't already at least at a sort of alpha prototype stage for the product, and the further along, the better. This isn't come and figure something out, or you have an idea and maybe you can build it, maybe you can't. We really focus on founders that can build, and the 3-month program is very focused on, on the build side of things. And then I think we also look at, do you have some unique perspective or insight into the category that you're building on? And then I think the ability to develop the business side of it. And I think one of the things that's really challenging, especially even for me as an investor looking at companies and meeting founders, is that sometimes the people who can build a really great product or have the best developers or are the best with creating the new technology, they're not always great at thinking through, like, how do I actually bring this to market? How do I think about this as a product with a business model behind it? Or how do I think about marketing or evangelism or whatever I need to do to build the business? And sometimes, unfortunately, the best products don't win. Sometimes it's the founders or the company that has the best strategy for getting into the market and for thinking about how it gets sold. And so, not that you have to be laser focused on making money or have your marketing strategy locked down from the first day, but I think we'll have founders that at least thinking about, what does it look like for this to be something that I do for the next 5 to 10 years, and not just how do I build something cool and have fun and maybe it goes somewhere, maybe it doesn't.
Peter Rojas, partner at Betaworks Ventures, always doing something really interesting. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about your camps or just connect with you, how can they do that?
It's really easy. You can contact me at my website. It's roj.as, or ping me on Twitter at Peter Rojas. And also, I do have a podcast, which thank you for not letting me forget this. So I have a new show. It was limited run. We did 8 episodes called Zero G, and you can find it. It's anchor.fm/0 and the letter G, and which amazingly was available as a URL. And it is a show that I do with Christy Pitts, who is also an investor. She works at Backstage Capital, but in a past life, she worked Verizon Retail in Gilroy, California. And so was on the front lines of the smartphone revolution. And I did Gizmodo and Engadget. And so she and I, we talk about smartphones from before the iPhone, and all the weird, wonderful devices that we all thought were going to be, we all saw changing the world, and we all thought Nokia and Palm were going to be around forever, and that turned out to be the case. And so it's a little bit of a sort of the rise and fall of this first generation of smartphones. And so we nerd out, we go year by year, starting in 2002. And we finish things off with a bonus tablets episode where we talk about all the crazy tablets that kind of went nowhere until the iPad took off.
Well, I would say don't miss it. Thanks again, Peter, for coming on and also sharing your podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here or go to tonyahall.net. Thanks for watching.